Hello, Dan.
It
How are you doing?
happens. It
Hey,
happens.
look at
Sorry
this.
I'm
about
the
that
man.
with the problem with the audio there.
It's all good.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm um I'm at rest. Yeah, it's I've been writing all day, so it's in this room, which is like this time of year. That's what I do. I lock myself in my office from about September through to about February or March, and just grind whatever book I'm working on. So no, yeah, it's all good. Having a good time.
Oh, brilliant. So how long have you been?
You look very chilled in your office. Are you usually this chilled
It
out of
depends
the
what I'm
day?
writing, to be honest. Like, I found with non-fiction, no, I'm like this with non-fiction, like, eh. But I've definitely come to realise since having done the two Essex Dogs novels, like you can't write fiction when you're uptight, or like you're so you can sort of see the sofa. I do quite a lot of like horizontal, uh, just sort of relaxation work. It doesn't. The trouble is, it doesn't resemble work very closely to most onlookers, and that's not their fault. That's mine. So it's a difficult sell when someone comes in and asks me to do something, and I'm lying half asleep on the sofa. And be gone, get out, get out, get out. I'm busy.
Yeah,
It's,
sorry, I'm working.
I'm working terribly hard
so
laying
no, no,
down.
no.
Yeah. People are saying they have bookshelf envy. Have you
I've
got a
got a
favourite
problem with the
shelf
shelves,
behind you?
honestly. No, so this is where we're at. I'm full, and I keep taking books. I keep like culling, but we're completely full. Everywhere's full. I've got no more bookshelf space in here. I've got no more left in the house. I've got piles of books all over the floor, like in my bedroom. I literally have no more space for books, and it's got to the point I'm like, do we have to move house to accommodate my book habit? Because I don't know what to do. Right, but so what's my favourite shelf? Actually, my favourite bit really is this. It's the corkboard, which looks a bit sparse at the moment, but that's like
Mm.
the planning wall, and that's where I do a lot of the really important work for all the books is actually there. And by the end of writing a book, usually it's just sort of covered in, you know what a meme is like with strings and
Yeah, like Sherlock
post-its and
Holmes.
all of that. So that's where I keep the sort
Yeah.
of structure of the book, or the important character notes, or just a log of where I am. So I've always got a sense of, as soon as I walk in here, I can see what I'm doing, and
Mm.
I can locate
Yeah.
myself within the superstructure or the architecture of the book, and that over the years has become the most important bit of the office. So when it's fiction, as with Essex Dogs and Wolves, it's not so much structure. I've found that that's not very helpful to the process of writing fiction, but it's usually character sheets, and every character has a few notes and a little sort of a couple of important biographical details, and just some reminders of plot ideas or scene ideas that I've come up with.
Yeah, I guess that touches on one of my questions was going to be, would you call yourself
Well,
an architect or gardener or kind of somewhere in between?
The architect of the gardener. Well, um, that distinction I first heard from the mouth of George R. R. Martin about 4 years ago.
mhm.
Four-ish years ago when I interviewed him in London, and he was the first. I'd never heard anyone talk about architects and gardeners, and he was very firmly in the gardener camp, and I was very firmly in the architect camp, and I was writing exclusively non-fiction at that time, and I'd found that my way to write non-fiction was very heavily structural and very architecturally based, and planning really was everything. And there's a lot of screenwriting kind of architecture and structure that goes into the non-fiction books. But George was very firmly like, I'm a gardener. You plant a seed and just see what grows. And I found the idea of that terrifying. But I've come to know that, yeah, guess what? George R. R. Martin does know what he's talking about when it comes to fiction, because it's definitely much more that with writing historical fiction. Although you've got the sort of, or in the type of historical fiction I'm doing, which is based around military campaigns in Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter, you've got a sort of basic outline of story provided by the real history. I found it plays much better, let's say, to be freeform, and that's why I have to be in a more physically relaxed state to write it, but to let that sort of that energy permeate the writing.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I absolutely love that. That is kind of more free flowing in kind of the fiction. And that kind of leads me on to, obviously, you've written non-fiction for quite a few years, and then you made that jump into the fiction world. And we've heard the story, but I think people will be very interested to hear where was the idea for Essex Dogs born?
Well, it came in a few parts, I suppose. I had the idea for the characters first back in 2017. I was working that year on a TV show called Nightfall, or the first season of Nightfall, which was about the Templars, and it was shooting in Prague, in the Czech Republic, in Barrandov Studios. And so I was flying a lot from London to Prague, maybe once every 3 weeks, at the busiest point of the production. So I just had a lot of time on planes, and I was also, for the first time, really kind of, emotionally and creatively invested in a sort of a fictionalized world. Although I was also at that time writing my book about the Templars. And I kind of one flight back from Prague to London, I was kind of dozing, and I kind of had this idea of the characters who became the Essex Dogs. And I made some notes about them, and I was listening to a song called Essex Dogs by Blur, and so I called the file Essex Dogs, and I thought, well, that'll change at some point, and of course it never has. But I didn't really know what to do with this group of characters. I had a lot of non-fiction work that I still had to do at that point. So I shelved it, and then it was New Year's Day 2019. I'd hired a house in Normandy New Year, and friends who were staying, we went out for a walk on Omaha Beach, which I'm sure a lot of people watching will be familiar with, maybe even have visited. It was one of the Normandy beaches, 1944 D-Day, and it's a very poignant place to visit. But it's an interesting place to visit. You start asking why these beaches, why is this a good place to invade? And I started thinking, well, actually, the 12th of July, 1346, Edward III landed 15,000 troops, not on Omaha Beach, on St. Valeug, which was closest to Utah Beach as it became in 1944. And I started thinking about, well, what if you take the energy and the sort of crackle and the attack in guitar playing terms of a sort of an American war film, Platoon, Band of Brothers, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, whatever, and build that into a story set in the 14th century. So instead of a sort of quite mannered, quaint medieval story, we have something that's really quite hard-nosed and has a lot of attack and go forward. And so that was those two events between 27 and 19 were the genesis of the idea for Essex Dogs. Then, as I mentioned, in the summer of 2019, I interviewed George R. R. Martin, and that was the sort of nudge I needed to creatively step into this world. I was always very reticent. Whenever anyone asked if I was going to do historical fiction, I'd always say no. I'll make jokes like I'll bring shame on my family. It'll be completely awful. I didn't quite have the confidence to do it. But George, what struck me about George was that he's such an avid reader of history, a phenomenal consumer of history, and yet he turns it into something that's got like a real sort of credible historical philosophy underneath it. But it's something else. It's fantasy. It's high fantasy. It's to an extent it's historical fiction. And that was the thing that kind of got me. It was like, this is a guy who's serious, but he's also having fun. And I thought that I would like to have a go at that. And so that's when I kind of seriously started work on Essex Dogs. And then the first book obviously came out last autumn, and the second book, Wolves of Winter, just came out this autumn in the UK.
So we can confirm no dragons in Essex Dogs.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, anyway.
Not yet.
Just wolves.
Wolves of Winter, strayed. Well, both of them. I would not say that there's a fantasy element in either of them, but what does exist in both of them, to an extent, is a degree of permeability between the real world and either the sort of the hallucinatory world, particularly in Wolves of Winter, of one of the characters, and a sort of something that I feel is quite organic to the Middle Ages, a sort of imagined other world. I mean, the Middle Ages are a time where there is belief in these other worlds, whether it's the Christian realm or the or the hell of damnation, or more sort of folk-rooted realms. And I'm trying to see just a little bit of it, particularly into Wolves of Winter with one of the characters' storylines, but not so much that it busts the category of historical fiction. I still want to remain within what's essentially a real human realm, whilst just giving a sense that there's a different mentality and a different set of sort of understandings of what's possible within that realm when you step into the 14th century.
Mm. Oh, that's really interesting. And I suppose that leads on to next, what drew you specifically to the 14th century instead of picking a different period of history?
I mean, it's a bit of a case of write what you know. There was going to be, I knew that switching from writing non-fiction to fiction was potentially going to be a difficult task, and potentially a very different task. And so I kind of believe in controlling variables. And so I thought, well, if we're going to go into a different type of writing, I should probably keep other variables as controlled as possible. So I knew quite a bit about the 14th century off the top of my head, having written the Plantagenets and, I suppose to a degree, the Hollow Crown. That doesn't really start in the 14th century, but it's within the world of the 100 Years' War. I sort of knew enough about that period to think, well, I'm not going in totally cold on the period as well as on the style and on the whole genre of writing. But frankly, more than that, it was the case that I'd been on Omaha Beach and I'd had this specific idea, and the opening scene of Essex Dogs on the beach at St. Valoug, a sort of medieval D-Day, was the scene that I was interested in exploring. And so that just led me, there's only two campaigns really that would be, you'd start there, and it would either be Crécy or Agincourt. And I had this feeling that perhaps within the realm of fiction, Agincourt was maybe a little overdone, not overdone, but I might be up against more. There'd be people had done it. I felt like people had done it a bit more than they'd done Crécy.
Yeah.
And I felt that Crécy was also a somewhat more interesting campaign with an interesting afterlife as well, because Wolves, it's not just the Crécy campaign of 1346 isn't just these 7 weeks leading up to a battle. It's the 7 weeks that lead up to the battle and then everything after, which amounts to about 11 months, which is the subject of Wolves of Winter. So I felt that this was also a kind of meaty territory to write a trilogy rather than a standalone novel. And of course, there's the Black Death, which would fall somewhere around it, which was the sort of cataclysmic event that I think adds a degree of high jeopardy to a kind of world when you're building it.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it touches on one of the aspects people were saying as you're describing how this idea came to you, is that it feels very cinematic and it feels like a movie when you're talking about it. And reading Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter, it does feel very visual. Would you say during your writing process that you try and imagine visually the scenes that you're crafting as you're writing them?
Yeah, it's entirely visual. I mean, it's visual to the extent that it's almost like I close my eyes and then write down what I see. And that's not the case, definitely, when I'm writing nonfiction. I mean, I'm writing a nonfiction book at the moment. I've gone back to, I'm writing a biography of Henry V, which will be out next year, which is a book I've been intending to write for like more than a decade. And it's not the same process. But the process for me of fiction is like, it's very, very visually imaginative. And once, and this was true of both Essex Dogs and Wolves, once the story had sort of taken light and it was going, it was almost like I was just kind of transcribing a film that I was seeing. Now, maybe some of that has come, although the writing process for me for nonfiction doesn't follow that pattern. As I've said before, I followed a lot of cinematic structures with nonfiction and tried to sort of bury those within traditional history storytelling. So maybe there's an element of that, but I don't know. It just seems to have been the way it happens. I kind of see the things happening, and the characters are very, very sort of, as I said, this corkboard planning wall over here. That's all about seeing the characters, and as I say, it's their portraits that I kind of bounce off when the story's unfolding.
Yeah.
Say those windows that were made, were they in Waterstones of your characters? Were absolutely amazing. Is that like helped you see them? Does it, does
Well,
it feel
yeah,
even more real after
and
seeing them?
Ash Fields, the artist who did in fact for both books, he did an amazing window campaign of bookstores, both Waterstone stores and indie bookstores across the UK. When we started on Essex Dogs, he did designs of all 10 of the dogs, and we worked pretty closely together on, Ash asking me, who are these characters, what do they look like, give me visual references, and once he'd created those characters, I mean, they really stuck. The depictions of the characters that he drew became the characters for me, and he made some. So we've got some art prints of them. So like that's Darius from the first book, and I we've got 3 of the characters, so I pop them up next to me when I'm writing, and those faces, they are the characters now. And he did 4 brilliant designs from Wolves of Winter of new characters from the book, and again those have just become who the characters are. And it's funny because some of them are inspired by contemporary renderings of real life characters, particularly for Wolves of Winter. We have a character like Sir Hugh Hastings, and we know from his tomb brass in Norfolk what he looked like. And so Hugh Hastings' face in Ash's rendering is based on the real Hugh Hastings. But others of them, for imaginary characters of my own creation, they've been kind of photo tears of people, real people in some ways, and we've kind of dropped elements of sometimes friends of mine, sometimes people he knows, sometimes famous people, have been sort of blended into the designs. It's just it's immense fun, and it really has sort of broadened the imaginative world of the books for me.
Oh yeah, and it is incredible artwork. I keep looking at them, and they just are amazing. And reading them, it feels visual anyway, but then that kind of enforces it. And so we've talked a lot about kind of the historical background, and a striking feature of Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter is how it feels very different to other historical fiction. Okay. Perhaps a truer representation of warfare, a lot about the marches and kind of the aspects that other authors no.
Oh, there's no glory.
But then also you've got a heart of brotherhood as well.
That.
And so there's kind of 2 kind of aspects there which are quite unique. And I was wondering, did you kind of consciously go into Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter with that idea?
No, I didn't do anything that consciously, because I was a total beginner, and I'd just blundering around, kind of making it up as I went along. And it's funny, I saw, when I was on book tour a couple of weeks ago for Wolves of Winter, I did an event in London, in the Waterstones in London, with Con Eagledon, who's obviously like a legend. And Con's been super kind about the books, very, very generous. I'd never met him in person before, and we had a really, really nice chat. And he said, yeah, when I got Essex Dogs, I was like, you've just made like such an elemental mistake. No, because these tableau books of multiple characters never work. It's like the first, everyone knows this is the first rule of historical fiction. You don't do this sort of thing. And I was like, wait, it's what? It's what? Nobody ever told me. So I did not know that writing about groups of characters was like generally considered a terrible idea. So I just thought, I like this sense of a group of characters. I mean, so that was not like a reaction against anything. It was just I was interested in writing about a group of men, a sort of band of brothers. The TV show Band of Brothers was in many ways an inspiration and something that stuck in my mind. Of course, like in Band of Brothers, just as happens in Essex Dogs, you tend to focus on a few characters more than you focus on others. In Essex Dogs and in Wolves of Winter as well, it's Loveday, who's the sort of reluctant leader of the dogs. He's a sort of old veteran, been around the block maybe one too many times, starting to doubt himself, certainly not sure he's in the right position, confused and perplexed that they've lost their real leader, the captain. And then you also see a lot of the action through the eyes of Romford, the youngest, newest recruit to the dogs, 16 years old, in many ways a sort of counterpoint to the Black Prince, the 16-year-old son of Edward III, who's leading the vanguard of the army. But I didn't do that as intending to be different, just as sort of tonally, it wasn't a sort of deliberate stylistic reaction to anything in particular, but I was interested in telling the story of of medieval warfare and in the sort of age of high chivalry through the eyes of ordinary people. That was the sort of powerful moving force to me. And as I started writing with that in mind, it became clear that the books had to explore what it was like to be part of a war in which the protagonists had no agency. And that is a strange thing to do in fiction, I came to realize quite quickly, or certainly quite soon after publishing Essex Dogs. I'm a huge admirer of Bernard Cornwell. I don't think you can be a historical fiction fan without loving Bernard's stuff. But I sort of reflected that one of the great points of difference between my books and Bernard's books, if they're worthy of comparison at all, is that Bernard tends to write these brilliant sort of individual heroes, quite grumpy, but full of agency. You know, they sort of barrel into history and they grab history by the scruff of the neck and they give it a shake and call it a bastard. And you know, and then they change the course of history often. And my view of that's what makes for wonderful novels. My view of history, having written and studied a lot of history, but then Bernard has as well. But my particular view is that the experience for the majority of people on a campaign like the Crecy campaign would to have no agency whatsoever. The history would just like run them over like a truck in the street, and they just got to get up if they can. And there's no point trying to like push. It's like trying to push a truck as it barrels towards you. You just got to either get out of the way or like curl up in a ball and just try and survive. And I felt like that creates an interesting tone for story, because you still want these characters to feel sympathetic, to have purpose, to have ambition. You need to root for them, and you need to sort of feel as you go along that they're capable of surviving, of having some effect on something somehow. But what that is and how that relates to the broader span of history, you have to ask different questions as an author. And I felt like it was one of the great things I had fun doing in Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter was showing how these characters might inadvertently affect history or think they're going to affect history, and then completely the opposite thing happens. There's a moment towards the end of Essex Dogs where Romford presents the Prince Edward, the 16-year-old son of Edward III, with some black armour. And I'm hoping readers are going to think, so now we're going to get that this is how the Black Prince becomes the Black Prince. And the Black Prince just takes a look at it and fucks it over his shoulder and like, oh, no one wears black armour. What are you talking about? And because there's a sort of layered history joke there, which is that he wasn't really called the Black Prince in his lifetime. So, so it's about then subverting expectations. Of course, later on in Wolves of Winter, he turns up wearing a black helmet and pretending it's been all his own idea. And Romford's like, what? I can't. So you can have lots of, you can bounce between having fun with the history, having fun with character. These are the sort of the great joys I'm discovering as a novice historical fiction writer.
Oh yeah,
it's the perk of being a historian, isn't it? That you can kind of supplement your books with these Easter eggs. And people, readers of your nonfiction, lovers of history will see them as well, and it's just another reason why we get to love. Yeah,
well, thank you, and I think having those little historical jokes is fun as well. But I also there are Easter eggs from all over the place hiding in these books, and some of them have nothing to do with history whatsoever. I've sort of, because I've tried consciously to bring in. I suppose one of the ways I've tried to make a point of difference, I've talked a little bit about not trying to make points of difference within the text, but one of the ways I've tried to is to bring in influences that are completely unconnected to the subject matter, and just see how it's like cooking and just going, well, I wonder what will happen if I lob a bar of dairy milk into this chili con carne. Oh, wow, look, it tastes delicious. Who knew? Now everyone puts chocolate in their chili. So an example is in Wolves of Winter. It was originally called Wolf Moon, or that was the working title, and we changed it sort of halfway through the writing because a Wolf Moon is a January moon, and it was about a winter siege and so on. Anyway, Wolves of Winter seemed a better title all of a sudden halfway through writing. Nevertheless, there was a song by a an artist called Mark Lanigan, who died a couple of years ago, called I Am the Wolf. And I've always got a playlist for a particular book. I listen to a lot of music around writing a book, and often get stuck on particular songs that influence writing of the book. And I Am the Wolf had some lyrics that I found quite interesting. And there was a point at which I had the characters singing a song. I didn't want to pick a sort of real medieval song. I'd written a phony medieval song in Essex Dogs and had quite a lot of fun doing that. It's the banquet scene. They're singing this incredibly rude song about the French, which is completely of my own invention. But I felt like Mark's lyrics to I Am the Wolf just suited my purposes here, and it also would create this wolf theme going out to the book. And so dropped lots of little Lanigan lyrics all the way through, and it coming back, actually to the point where at the end of writing, I thought I'd better clear this with Lanigan's estate. And they very, very graciously allowed me to use them in the book, and said, which I was blown away by, the Mark would have loved the story and all of that. So that's a sort of Easter egg that's nothing to do with history, and only if you're about 42 years old and listen to a lot of grunge music in the 1990s is that have any interest or relevance to you. But that's me, and that made me happy. So
yeah, I love those.
The person who should be mostly happy is you.
To some extent,
it definitely works.
I found this in writing, and this is only worth, well, the older I get, the more I think, look, I trust my judgment enough to know that if I like it, it's fine. And if nobody else likes it, at least I'll be happy. I'll feel like I've created something that was true to my original intention. That's a hard attitude to come out with when you're a total beginner as a writer, and because often your judgment is not very good. Mine certainly wasn't when I was starting out as a writer. But as I've gotten more experienced, at least I know which voice in my head to trust, and to have the confidence to say, listen, I like this. That'll do. That's all I can do.
Yeah.
Links to the saying of
definitely. What did you find more fun to write? Did you sorry, Will, did you prefer writing the Big Battle of Cressy or the Siege of Calais?
Well, as a set piece, the Battle of Cressy is a set piece, and there are several set pieces within Essex Dogs about the Cressy campaign. One is the crossing of the Blanchetaque when they're fording a river. One is actually before that, the crossing of the Seine. Maybe the one that I think has touched most people or terrified the life out of most people when they've read Essex Dogs is really early on, which is the sack of Saint-Lô, when one of the characters goes mad. A little like Bishop in the first Alien film, but a little not like Bishop in the first Alien film as well. And not Bishop, that's the second Alien film. The android in the first Alien film. You know what I mean? There's a certain scene so Essex Dogs. There were lots of set pieces I enjoyed writing. Wolves is a slightly different matter, and it's structurally a different story. Whereas Essex Dogs is the story of a march and a battle. It's a land campaign. That has, by definition, a lot of baked-in narrative imperative. It's got a lot of go forward, and as by virtue of the story, and it really is a story of going somewhere, doing something, going somewhere, doing something, going somewhere, doing something. The end. That's its kind of beat. And in fact, the job of writing that was to kind of disguise that almost, so it didn't feel too obvious and formulaic, even though you're probably driving towards the battle.
Yeah.
In Wolves of Winter, there's no set piece. So the set piece is, well, what does this siege consist of? The English march to Calais. They sit outside Calais for 11 months and try and starve it out. So that is what the history gives you. Now, there are some incredible, spectacular visual opportunities within this siege, because the English build on the marshes outside Calais this astonishing siege town called Villeneuve-la-Hardi, bigger than any other English city apart from London at its full capacity. It's a fully realised sort of wooden city on the marshland. And what an atmospheric place to write and to explore. You've got a bunch of pirates led by Jean Maron, real-life pirate, who operate out of a real-life pub called the Tin Jar up at Sangatte, and they're running the blockade into Calais. Those give you some small set-piece opportunities, although they're not definitive to the story by any means, but they're incredibly atmospheric. You've got sort of side missions, if you like. If this was Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead or whatever, you're off on this. These are your little sort of shoot as many armadillos as you can. It's like when they go off to some of the English splinter off to towns in Flanders. So I kind of represented that. I knew I had to build, or I wanted to build in a sort of a subplot about the King Edward III trying to marry one of his daughters to the Count of Flanders' son, but like how to do that without having huge tangential, not that connected bits. So I've kind of sewn that together with one of the characters who survives from Essex Dogs. So there are lots of these little opportunities within the story to do exciting things, and in fact, I've had to make the absolute most out of those, because the fact is, at the end of the siege, there is a famous vignette. It's the one captured by Auguste Rodin in those wonderful late 19th century sculptures. He did many, many versions of them, 12 of the original, the Bourgeois de Calais. The burghers coming out of Calais with nooses around their necks to present themselves to Edward III. I knew that I'm driving towards that scene, but that doesn't compare to the Battle of Crécy in terms of sheer military drama. So it's a different task. Now, I really enjoyed writing Wolves of Winter. I found it extremely hard and extremely emotionally draining. I wrote the whole thing in 5 months. It was super intense. It's a super dark. There are super dark bits to the story. It was very, very challenging in terms of its narrative structure, but that's why I'm doing this. I chose to start writing historical fiction when I turned 40, having done 10 non-fiction books, specifically because I wanted to go into dark places as a writer and really, really test myself and hurt a bit, and to try and improve as a writer overall, and to keep moving and keep developing. So I really enjoyed Wolves. I mean, I sort of didn't enjoy it, but I feel like it was a great and valuable experience.
Looking back on it,
I don't know what running a marathon like, but it's like doing it. I've had a boxing match. It's like survival, but afterwards you feel terrific.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely hurt the reader.
Yeah. Would you say that the experience was?
Did you hurt? Did it make you hurt?
Yes. Well,
definitely.
The characters, you grow to love these characters, and then history, as you said, grabs them by the scruff of the neck, and it's painful to read sometimes in a good way, but you can't stop reading.
Well, I was sitting here very often writing that, in tears.
Yeah.
And there's certain bits that when I read them back, that said the same thing happened, and I thought to myself, have I gone too far? Have I gone mad? And possibly the answer was yes at times, but I thought I'm putting it all in here, going all in, and if it has this effect on me, then it might have this effect on some readers. And what do you come to fiction for, man? Sometimes for escapism, but often to be moved, to have your heart broken, right? In a kind of safe space.
You can put it down if you want.
So I'm glad I hurt you.
Didn't think I'd be hearing that.
No, do you know what? So last night I've been reading the Karl Ove Knausgaard book, which is in this new series he's doing. It's only it's this sort of it's a tableau of stories, some sort of interconnected, and the new book is just 2 stories about these 2 different people living different lives, one in Norway in the 80s and one in sort of present day Russia. And I got halfway through and he just smacks you in the gut and you don't even see it coming. And I actually sat up in bed and exclaimed out loud, what the through the book. And I thought, yeah, man, that's elite if you could do that to your reader.
It's a good book when that happens. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I was tempted to throw Wolves of Winter a few times, but I didn't want to hit anything, And also,
don't go ruin the broken.
They're too nice, aren't they?
Just too nice. So
Well, I'm glad he showed the discipline there.
So good, those books. They look so good. And I love
they're great together.
We've been speaking of Easter eggs, but I love the fact that there were 1,346 Essex Dogs for the year 1346, and then 1,347 Wolves of Winter. And I've actually had, I love the touches the broken binding guys do are just so amazing. So people have been coming up to me on book tour, showing me, hey, look, I got number 867 of Essex Dogs, and look, they sent me 867 of Wolves of Winter. Like, it's little things like that have I know people have really responded to. I love producing books with them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the broken binding are awesome, and the books next to each other on the shelf, they look amazing, and we love some spray editors.
Have you seen it done in the factory?
So I haven't. I've seen kind of the equipment that they use, but I need to be there one day as they're actually doing it. I think that would be amazing.
It's like it is astonishing to see this sort of just the craftsmanship, and I love that that's happening in books, right?
Yeah.
I'm old enough to remember the doom that ebooks are just going to kill this stuff, and it's not happened at all. It's not. If anything, there's like a greater premium now on having the hardbacks, and I know people are buying the special edition to keep as a sort of beautiful item, and then buying another hardback to read, and then buying the audiobook as well. Like, publishing is sort of is surviving, and it's like, if anything, thriving in this kind of weird new digital age.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people in the comments saying how much they love the aesthetic of the books as well as the content inside.
I think it matters. In fact, I passionately believe it matters. And I can remember my publisher's head of Zeus pretty early on, with one of my non-fiction books. They gave me a ribbon. The ribbon that marks the page. I was like, I got a ribbon. They're like, you got a ribbon. You got a ribbon. I was like, I thought only the big boys got a ribbon. They're like, you got a ribbon. And it was like I just remember looking at it going, this book is really nice because of this ribbon. Like this is like a really nice thing because of the ribbon. And it was. I know it sounds totally dumb, but it's the moment I was
this is the best ribbon in the world.
Books as items, you can't replicate the ribbon experience with an ebook. Not that I'm hating on ebooks. We like ebooks, but you can't put a ribbon on an ebook. And there was this like moment, wasn't there? Like maybe 18 months, 36 months ago, when people were like, "Hey, well, maybe you can put an NFT ribbon." No, I'm sorry.
Move it across.
I'm sorry. If you
everyone's not going to work.
Yeah, they love the smell of books, but the ribbon thing is the trump factor. 100%.
It's sensory. It's tactile. It's and the same. I found the same has been true of going out on book tour as well. Like, we've now got these so many different dimensions of talking to readers. Like, I love doing this sort of thing with you guys, but I think partly the pandemic experience and partly just the sort of the profusion of different ways of electronically communicating means that going out and doing live events is suddenly just having this great resurgence, and I'm seeing like big audiences, people hanging around wanting to talk, wanting to get books signed afterwards and stuff. So I think we're in a good place, and people are really valuing like sensory, real life experiences to sit alongside the digital.
Yeah, conventions are packed.
Oh, definitely. It's amazing the amount of. Yeah, and we've actually had someone comment here saying that they were the narrator, the German audiobook narrator for Powers and Thrones, and they said that it was an incredible experience, and they wanted to thank you.
I thank you. I mean, I read the UK version, and I was so hardcore, man. That's a long book. I read the UK audiobook of Powers and Thrones. Powers and Thrones in English is about 235,000 words. And I think it was 8 days filming, 8 days recording. And we did it in that must be summer 2020, I'm going to say. There were 8 hot days that summer, and they were mega hot. There was like pushing 40 degrees in London. And I sat in a dark booth with no windows on a south-facing wall, literally stripped to my underpants, with sweat running down me, reading this audiobook. So I can only hope my German counterpart had a more pleasant experience than that.
Fingers crossed. Did you have you thought of perhaps doing the audiobooks? Like, have you enjoyed it and you'd really like to do it again? What is it that's very different about that process?
Ben Miles does the audiobooks for Wolves and for Essex Dogs, and Ben is like, the guy's a legend. So he did Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series. He played Cromwell in Hilary's, in the stage of that adaptations. He's an incredible actor and an astonishing narrator. And I'm super happy he's done the fiction. He's done a better job than I could ever have done on it. I'll still. I'm doing this Henry V biography. I would imagine if they want me to do it, I'll read the audiobook for that. I know it makes a difference. Or a lot of readers say that they like it if a writer can and does read their own audiobooks. I find that I know what inflections I've put into the writing, and I deliver them the way I intended them to be delivered. I've done a lot of voice work. I do the podcasts, and I've done a lot of TV voiceover work as well. So I can actually. It's quite a hard thing to do on your voice. If you do 60 hours of voice recording to make a 36-hour book or whatever. But more than anything, in a really selfish way, beyond just making a great audio book product, it's so improving as a writer to sit down and read your book from start to finish. And usually the point at which I've been, you're recording the audio books, you can't make any changes.
Yeah,
it's gone, and you can't. And often with WhisperSync, you weren't allowed. It would stop it from matching up if you were reading the Kindle and listening to the audiobook. So you are confronted with your writing, and you're forced to read it out loud, and you find out what your tics are, what words you overuse, what sort of what techniques, what kind of openers, what kind of closers you're using too much, and every time I've read an audiobook, I've come away thinking, well, I've learned something about how I'm writing that I didn't realize before, and often like striking out habits. It just makes the writing a lot cleaner. It's an improving process as a writer to me to do that, and for that reason, if no other, it's really valuable.
Yeah, it sounds quite rewarding. And would you say that when you're writing, are you thinking about that this will be consumed via audiobook as well? Would you say that influences your writing?
Funnily enough, I haven't thought quite like that too much before, but I am thinking. I'm doing this Henry book, the Henry V biography now, which is for next autumn publication, and I'm thinking about it more than I have before. And I think that's partly because as I said, I've been doing this podcast. I do a podcast for Sony Music called This Is History, and we've been doing sort of multi-episode series about the Plantagenets. And so we've done a series on Henry and Helena of Aquitaine, Henry II and Helena of Aquitaine. We've done a series on Richard the Lionheart. We've done a series on King John. We're doing another series on Henry III and Edward I. So it's a big kitchen sink drama, soap opera, but it's also the kind of the Plantagenet history. And because I write the scripts for that, they're about 3,000. Well, actually, they're about 2,800 words long each script. As I'm writing the Henry V biography, it's the first time I've written a substantial piece of non-fiction since I started writing those scripts, and I'm thinking a lot more, just maybe out of habit, about the cadence of the sentences for reading aloud. And it's not like I'm trying to write an audiobook. And it's actually about balancing it so it still reads the way I want it to on the page. But I've definitely got more of a sense for, I know this will sound good on audio.
Yeah. Kind of like a rhythm.
It's a rhythm, but that's like, that's what I've sort of gone for over the years as I've tried to improve and change and develop my prose style anyway. It's music and it's cadence and it's and that's not just at the sentence level, it's at the paragraph level, it's at the chapter level, it's often even at the sort of grand structural book level. It's like symphonic type of writing, and you put a sentence here that is going to chime with a sentence or a motif or a paragraph or something you're going to do 10 chapters later. I've kind of tried to think like that over the years, and that's I remember starting out writing non-fiction and thinking that I was starting, and this would be back in the sort of early, like 2005, 6, 7, 8. I was writing my first book, thinking that the sort of the great age of historical prose stylists seemed to have gone away, and that the sort of there weren't many writers around who I felt were really paying attention to writing great great sounding books that people would actually want to read. And when I was studying history, late 90s, early 2000s, in school and university, I found that most of the books I was set to read were almost unreadable to anybody who didn't have to write a weekly essay from them. That they were, and maybe that was the nature of an academic reading list, but I certainly felt that why isn't anyone trying to write well? And of course, that was incredibly arrogant and unfair. But it was also somewhat true. And so I've put a lot of effort into that, the musicality of the prose, into the cinematic kind of structures that underpin the non-fiction writing. Those things that will mean readers will just have a good time. And then the job is to make sure that doesn't detract from the scholarly rigor, particularly in history I'm talking about now rather than fiction, the scholarly rigor that is a non-negotiable when you're writing history.
Well, as a reader, I can definitely say that we can feel the effort you put in, especially where Northampton's insights.
That's great,
don't they? So.
Well, that's so having spoken quite seriously then about non-fiction, I can't deny that, and having spoken quite bleakly about wanting to make you cry with fiction, there is also part of the attraction of writing historical fiction is to have some fun. And you mentioned the Earl of Northampton, who I think is the candidate from Essex Dogs and Wolves of Winter most likely to get his own Better Call Saul spin-off series. Northampton just sort of bundled into my life in Essex Dogs, and has just been such a joyous presence since. I mean, he's a very interesting character, I think, historically. Well, not historically. I mean, he's a useful character historically, because William de Boon, Earl of Northampton, is not very well known to anybody, and he was like a free hit in terms of building his personality any which way I wanted. But he gives a sort of historical commentary throughout both of the books in what I hope is a subtle way. He is of the noble class, the elite noble class. He's friends with the king. He can speak truth to the king to some degree. But he's the only one of the nobles who really regards the ordinary men as people, and he speaks to them somewhat in their language, or at least in a kind of a coarse, a vulgarized version of the more refined language that his peers speak, and he has, I've given him the best swearing, and coming up with Northampton's curses, which really amount to inventive blasphemy more than anything else. It's just it's so much fun. I just have great fun writing him, and I hope that in equally as much as the sort of rip your heart into and don't apologize afterwards element is there in the book. So I hope that these moments when I'm really just sitting here giggling to myself, or texting my mate Rick saying, what do you think of this line for Northampton, and him giggling away wherever he is. I hope that comes through as well, because that's a big part of the reason for doing fiction.
Oh, it does. And people here are asking for Earl of Northampton spin-offs.
I mean, it's not impossible.
The masses are asking for it.
If we talk this time next year, I'll be nearly finished writing the final book of the series, and it's contracted as a trilogy. And the question we're asking ourselves now, and I say we, I mean me and my publishers, is like, what do we do? Do we carry on writing the series? Do we turn the trilogy into something longer? I'm not too inclined to do that. I'm not inclined to do that at the moment because I think it'll hurt the writing of the third book. It'll, I'll start trying to protect characters to save them.
Please do that.
Please do that.
It'll make the third book worse if I do that. But I do feel like we have created something in these books that is a way of approaching a world, and there's a tone, and is maybe what they sort of grandiosely call a universe in the cinema, and once you have this, if we can conceive of an Essex Dogs universe in which here's the style, here's the sort of general arena, here are some of the characters, and you can move back and forwards in time and tell stories in and around the core of this trilogy, then it's not impossible that William de Boon, the Earl of Northampton, could have a book. If you think about when he's a young man, he and Edward III, when they're teenagers, they're this little sort of gang who really carry out the coup that brings Edward III out from the shadow of his usurper mother and her boyfriend. And that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? A sort of Lost Boys with the Earl of Northampton at the core of it. I could see that being part of this world. Do you see what I mean?
Dan.
I could see that being part of this world. I'm not saying that's what I'm going to do, but I could definitely see that here we have a rich world to explore, and some characters who might merit their own little spin-offs.
So the plan is then Northampton, spin-off, and Broken Bond.
That's not the plan. You're trying to trade me up from an idea to a plan.
Hear me out. But this Broken Bond edition's going to have a ribbon. Come on.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
If you're going to give me a ribbon, then we'll do it.
That's the only factor needed. I suppose you've been talking a lot about the craft and kind of the effort that you put in these ways. Has it been quite strange, obviously, jumping from fiction to non-fiction, or has it just kind of been a natural thing going back to that?
It's been a real joy going back to it. I was pretty broken after doing Worlds of Winter. If you caught me like April time when I was just signing off the manuscript, I was really it had really taken a chunk out of me writing this book, emotionally, just energy wise. Like I say, 5 months, it was hardcore. It was super hardcore. And I took a lot of time off this year to recover, which sounds, sort of, like I'm being melodramatic, but I was like drained from writing it. It was super hardcore. And I went, April, I went out to LA, to New York, to Israel. I went, traveled a lot, and knowing that I have to finish this Henry V book by the end of the year. I had it all planned out, and I know what it's going to be, but I couldn't start writing again. I knew if I did, I'd feel physically terrible, and I'd probably write garbage. But I also hadn't written a non-fiction. I'd been writing the podcast scripts, but I hadn't written a non-fiction book since Powers and Thrones, which I completed a long time ago now, relatively. 3 years, that's a long time for me not to write a non-fiction book. And so I didn't know how it was going to go. And man, it's just been such a joy. I'm loving every day of writing. And I'm I'm trying this new approach to the storytelling that's I've never done before. I haven't written a biography before, so everything is sort of new in a non-fiction sense. The chapters are much shorter. The prose just has a different poise to it that I would never have dreamed of that I would do the book like this, but I think it's working, and it's given this incredible immediacy to the story, which I don't think anyone's ever managed to bring to Henry V, who's quite an austere character. It was said, certainly when he was, by the time he became king, it was said by a French observer that if you went for a walk with him, it was like hanging out with a monk, not a soldier. The mask was down. So it's a hard subject for a biography because he's just a hard guy. And the more recent biographies that have been written about him, I always feel the writers have been slightly repelled by him and then have ended up just sort of telling him off for his cruelty, which is to misunderstand the job of king, and it's really to misunderstand Henry himself. So I think I'm finding, particularly through his childhood and his teenage years, a new way of understanding him and a new prose style for making that feel close to the reader. And I don't think I'd have been able to do any of that without having done the 2 fiction books. I think I have developed as a writer enough to have the confidence and the understanding of the sentence to be able to do that. So I'm really enjoying going back to non-fiction, which is exactly where I wanted to be. When I finished Powers and Thrones, I was like pretty much broken down by non-fiction and needed to do something different. Wolves of Winter had got me to a certain place with fiction that, okay, now I can go back. But I'm already, the interesting thing is, as I'm writing this Henry V book, I'm getting these mad ideas for book 3 of Wolves of Winter, so book 3 of the Essex Dogs trilogy. So now I'm going to go back and do that next. So it's I tell you what it's like. It's like a medieval crop rotation system. You sort of, if you put beans in one year, then then the potato, not the potatoes. God, that's rookie error. But beans in one year, then the wheat will grow better the next year, whatever the hell it is. And wow, yeah, it feels great. It feels fantastic, and I feel like, God damn, I've got the best job in the world. I really, really do. And I don't say that. I'm not trying to brag in saying that. I'm trying to emphasize that I do understand how fortunate it is to be in this position, but then what a responsibility it is to not get lazy and just go, I'll just toss off another book and the idiots will buy it. Like, no, I'm going to put everything into doing this, not just I'm writing in a particular book, but in terms of like managing my career and managing my development as a writer. Like, I want to get better every book. I want to give people a better book every time than they got the last time. And so I need to, I take that seriously.
Yeah, it really sounds like you're doing that. I cannot wait to be reading this biography of Henry V as well. It sounds like it's going to be awesome.
I hope so. I don't look. You never know. I'm always realistic about that as well. And you go, when you're creating something, if it's going well, at that point you're like, yeah, this is gonna be the greatest thing I've ever done. And you never know. You never know how it's going to survive collision with reality. But I'm doing my best, so that's all I can do.
We trust you, Dan. I think we're in safe hands.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, boys.
We definitely trust you.
Well, it's been an absolute blast. My final question has to be, right, Dan, we've got you, we've got Dan Snow. Who would win in an arm wrestle?
Oh, Dan would win easily, because Dan Snow is, I'm taller than people realise, routinely. I mean, every time I go into a book event, lots of people will say, oh my God, you're like a foot taller than I thought you were. I apparently have the personality of somebody who's 5'3". I was just measured by my doctor the other day. I'm 187.5 centimetres, which is a smidgen under 6'3". You've got to remember that Snow is a monster. I mean, the guy is like a Sasquatch. Like he's like a head taller than me. And, he rode for Oxford, didn't he? So, the guy's got long levers. This arm is not short. That's a reasonable sized man's arm. But I mean, Snow's got some orangutan shit going on. He's just gonna it's physics, man. You got an arm that much longer. There's no way. There's no way. He's in Tyson Fury's category. I'm cruiserweight at best. So, but that's. He's also such a lovely man.
Yeah.
The only way I think I'm beating Dan in an arm wrestle is that he's such a kind, good-hearted, gracious, generous guy that he's gonna let me win just because he's that nice. that's not the right way to win. So I just got to accept where I am in life.
Got to be realistic, as you said.
Tell you what. Well, I tell you what.
So there we go.
There's more Dans doing history, aren't there? Like we're not counting. There's Carlin. Who knows what he's doing in arm wrestling? I like him as well, but who knows how he's coming out arm wrestling? Danny Dyer moved into the history space.
That is so true.
And I could see him.
He's got important ancestors, so it could happen.
Yes, in certain night clubs at a certain time of night, I feel like he'd have the to win an arm wrestle. If you catch my drift, Crookshank I don't think is part of the conversation, but you can't count anyone out. Are there any other Dans who do history? There must be thousands of us.
Lots of competition in the arm wrestling Dan industry.
That's the next convention we're gonna.
All right.
Yeah, the Dan arm wrestle. Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. We've learned about your writing craft. We've learned who would win in an arm wrestle. We've learned exactly how tall you are and the passion and effort that you put into every one of your projects. Yeah. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And thank you for answering all of our questions.
Thank you for everything you do, guys. It's awesome and it's great to talk to you. I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, Dan. Really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
Bye.
See you later.